He
Up
told me
chat.
he also contacted a colleague at the sheriff's department in the county where he was working,
Hold
and
up.
that she would contact me in a day or two. While I was on an assignment there, I spoke to two deputies and a detective about the woman in the van. No one ever told me anything about them, but they were very interested in the whole
There we go.
process. My nightmare is one day I'll turn on a true crime show and see a report about this woman and her gang.
Alright, chat.
Robbing,
I think our
killing
goal for
people.
today was to furnish the house and fix up the farm again. Clear out some area and then just make it look better altogether. Maybe build a little shed
I was at
for
the
like
gas
the seeds
station
and
and went
shit.
to the register to buy gas and some drinks as I was going on a small road trip. I got there and there was a large balding man with ginger beard with the name tag Guy. I smiled at him and was polite since I work customer service and try to be nice to everyone because you'll never know what the kind of day the said person may be having. Guy smiled at me and asked if we'd met before. I've never seen him in my life, and I made a joke saying, "I just have one of those faces, I guess," and laughed it off. I had alarm bells ringing in my head because of his tone. I had a deep sinking feeling in my gut as he took his time checking me out. Guy kept talking to me, saying that I looked great today, and he guessed my dead name. My dead name, but I haven't told anyone my dead name in years as I'm non-binary and hate people knowing that. I try my best and keep my dead name a secret, plus I was paying with cash, so I couldn't think of a way that he would know this. I smiled more to brush it off, trying to imply that wasn't actually my name, saying, "No, I go by Royal." He frowned and scratched his head, and I could have swore that I saw bloody dandruff or something like that come down onto the counter. I tooled my change and went out to my car, filling it up as quickly as I could. I pulled out my phone with the intent to let others know my location and just tell my friends and my mom. Feeling hot breath on my neck and someone's body pressed against my back, I spun around, and there he was, Guy. The most ungodly smell hit my nose as he looked down at me. I'm 5'6", and my best guess was he was at least 6 foot. Guy smiled. Multiple of his teeth had been missing. He said I was rude for talking about him behind his back. I laughed it off and apologized. I went to quickly get the gas pump out of the car. Before I even could get my hand on it, Guy grabbed it from me and did it for me, smirking and saying that I shouldn't bother doing such manly things. He went to explain that he finally knew where he knew me from. He explained that I was a slave in a past life, and that he was my master,
Oh
and he knew
lord.
my frame anywhere. I'm 17 and I've never met this man in my life. I nodded and tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, really?" I didn't want to anger him. The man didn't seem to be happy with that as I tried to go around to get into my car. He opened the passenger door to get it, and I was in full panic mode and had started my car. I just put the pedal to the metal with both doors swinging open. As I drove away, Guy had fallen to the ground and started to scream and curse. I eventually pulled over after a mile and just shut both of them, crying to myself, silently. So I had the unfortunate ability to recall something really scary my older sister and I saw on a walk home during elementary school. She confirmed that what I remembered was true, and the more I think about it, the more it scares my 36-year-old brain. My sister Bianca and I are 4 years apart, and I had the blessing of being able to have the most attentive and protective big sister, and she always has this remarkable sixth sense. To the point that I have swore over the years that my gullible naivety I had at that age never could grasp that this type of situation was extremely dangerous. Until now. I'm 7 years old, 1st or 2nd grade. My sister is in the 5th grade, age 11. We lived in a small town in the South Bay area of California, 45 minutes south of San Jose. This was an extremely hot day, but we walked the usual 8 blocks from our elementary school to our home. Just some info regarding my mom. She worked nights stocking at our local Safeway most of my adolescent life, so we were very independent. Got up and ready for school on our own, etc. Mom slept until 3:30 p.m. and then up, clean, wash, and made dinner and then worked by 9 p.m. I mentioned this more for background of the type of childhood I had. It was a different time during the mid-90s. Every day we stayed after school for an hour with our favorite kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Marfia. My siblings and I all had the blessing of having the same kindergarten teacher that we developed a super close relationship with her and enjoyed helping her clean up and prepare for her morning class every day. Mrs. Marfia usually would drive us home, but couldn't that afternoon due to staying later than usual to wait for her husband James to pick her up and take her to the mechanic to pick up her car. So this meant that my sister and I were going to be the only kids walking home at this time. We didn't care because of all the attention this wonderful teacher gave us. I'll post some of the wonderful things she did for my sister and I growing up in another category. She was a gem. In the 90s, the area behind my house was an undeveloped lot, a good 3 blocks long by 1.5 blocks wide directly in front of the newly placed skate park, so from my backyard gate we could see the park. Upon passing the park, we would race or run from the sidewalk that borders the park to the back door of our fence, which was my favorite because my sister always let me feel like I was the winner. But halfway through the run, I'm ahead as I mentioned before, and I'm passing through the normal sticker bushes. Everything is dirt and ugly tall weeds that would poke you badly if you got too close. Some of the bushes you could hide under, but it was so ugly we usually raced to avoid the stickers. But I'm literally 100 yards from the fence, and I hear my sister scream my name. Like not a normal scream, but she shouts my first name and middle name really sharply, and I stop dead in my tracks. I yell back at her, "What?" Right before I can turn around and fully see what's going on, she just pummels into me. She's grabbing my shoulders while wrapping her arm to shield my face from what I'm sure I'll be scared of. And this is all the while shoving me forward, and I'm just so confused in this moment. There was no way to say anything, but from the break between her fingers, I see 2 sets of legs under a large bush, and this is where my memory plays like I'm watching a movie and I can rewind every detail. I have spent many hours with my sister recalling details that I blocked but scared myself that I could vividly recall. So, I witness an assault. They are laying down under a large bush with both sets of legs exposed. I see a man dressed in a red tank top with blue dirty jeans and black boots. He has sunglasses on. He was very agitated looking because he was choking a young woman. She was probably barely 20, wearing overalls, a white t-shirt, and white sandals. Her face was very dirty, bruised, and lips blue, scratching at his hands, moaning, trying to get air out. And this is all I get to see. Obviously more than enough before my sister yanks me to an alternate way. She said that she was afraid that he'd follow us or see us unlock our gate to the house, so she took me around the long way. I'm terrified, sobbing, asking her, "Sissy, what was that? That guy was killing her." And my sister responds, "No, Mama, let's go. Hurry. We can tell Mom. Just hurry up." All I see after is a blur until we get home and wake my mom up, hysterically telling her what we saw. She called the police, but we never got any information regarding if they found her. I've scoured the internet for anything about an assault or kidnapping, anything that I'd never seen or heard. My sister cried when I asked her recently about this memory, thinking it was something I had a nightmare about. But the detail I recalled made her scared that it severely traumatized me. But who knows? It's scary in any context. This happened about a year ago, and I still have yet to return to the store without my husband. So last July, I took my then 4- and 6-year-old sons to Target to back-to-school shop. Since having kids and hearing all these horror stories, I am very observant of my surroundings when out. Anyways, while at Target, like most women, I looked through all the sections. While in the women's clothing, I noticed 2 older men close by that kept looking our way. I thought maybe I'm just being paranoid, so I kept going about my business, but keeping my boys super close. We go to the baby section, they pop up. Toys, makeup, and same thing. I was really feeling uneasy because they seemed to be everywhere we were, and they never had a cart. One guy was holding one little thing. I go check out and wait for a big group of nurses leaving Starbucks to walk out. I threw the boys in the car without buckling them and locked the doors. As soon as I look up, the 2 guys walk out empty-handed, looking around. I didn't think they saw me, so I started to leave when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw them behind me, now in a truck. I stopped right there and turned around and took a photo so they could see me. They turn like they're going back to the store, and I park over a couple of stores down where they can't see me, and I call the cops. While I'm on the phone with them in a sort of full-blown panic at this point, I watch one of the guys change his shirt and then go back inside. I waited until the police got there so I could make sure that they got and had the right guys. I don't know what their plan was that day, but my mama gut told me that it wasn't anything good. I'm so thankful that my babies and I are okay. About 3 years ago, I, a 21-year-old female, was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job, and I remember being so excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at that time, and typically it was just my cook, a 20-year-old male, and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyways, so it was nice. I can remember it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance I did at that time. I never could really trust my gut very much because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I felt half the time was valid or not. I mention this because when all things went down, it felt real and I had an absolute feeling. I had started my shift that evening at around 3 p.m. I said goodbye to the last waitress and I was on my own with my cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu that we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to just sit in and eat instead. I'd say at around 10 to 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up and 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed it by asking since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them in a booth and took their orders. I noticed they had a red binder and a black pen. Remember this. I then went to attend to my other customers as there were a couple of other tables I was waiting on. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be normal, as this being a tourist vacation state, it wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was reasonable for me to assume that it was nothing if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number to a realtor that I knew closely and well since I often went to church with her. There wasn't any other notable interactions I really had aside from occasional small talk if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you are in the food industry, you know that as a server, you don't really get breaks. Just lunch most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation, and this is important. Now, I didn't really notice it at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing about 5 feet below, but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask some personal questions, such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things was not a good idea. However, this for some reason was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all her questions as best I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She had told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless, I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said that she needed pretty and young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they get paid $30K. She didn't specify the time or length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help her with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid business and that I probably was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I truly was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said that she'd show me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain that I wasn't going anywhere with her near that car. I declined yet again and said that I was fine right here where I was. I said that she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant. After which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the two men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I'd just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them. Because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have, I just sort of laughed it off with him. At the end of the night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned this weird interaction. A panicked look came over her and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay, and that's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke to me that I was almost trafficked, and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that except for the red binder and the black pen I told you to remember. I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now, normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there just to eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. While I get into my apron and sit this gentleman, he was well dressed, not in a suit and tie, but just nicely dressed, and he was alone. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and a black pen with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more, that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended my tables. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said no, not here. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told my cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since that day. I am a person with pretty long hair, but not female nor trans. There was a girl in my university class last year that has the same hair color as me, black, long hair. She's quite popular and usually gets asked out a lot. Sometimes people confuse me with her due to us both having black hair, similar height, and similar hair length. She would sometimes tease me about having to worry about such long hair, but that's off topic. Now, one night in February, I finished my
Oh,
work and wrapped up
brother.
since
Fuck
there was
off.
the term break. It was getting a little dark out, but I figured that a single kilometer walk to a friend's house wouldn't be dangerous. I used to play a bunch of sports in high school, so I feel like the close proximity to the campus, as well as my personal strength, were able to defend myself for just an hour. Canada, where I live, is quite safe, as many of you might know, so I walked on. It was around 10:30 when I started walking. Tons of students already left the campus beforehand, so there wasn't a lot of people traveling with me. Those who were probably just decided to spend another night in the dorms, and my hometown is in British Columbia, and my university was far away, so I needed to board a plane to go back. Around 800 meters of walking later, I felt the presence of someone walking behind me. Suddenly, he put his arm around my neck and started choking me. It took me a good second to realize what was going on, and the person was choking me so hard that I can feel my jugular vein expanding at the bottom due to lack of space for blood to go through. I kick him right in the back of the knee, or the bottom of the thigh, I forget, and that made his knee bend forward. He started falling to the ground. I back kicked him in the balls, which is when he let go a little, and then I got out of his arms and started punching his face. In my adrenaline-filled moment, I thought he was going to attack me again, so I punched him a few times to make sure he wouldn't get up, ran away, and then I called the police. Thankfully, I was okay. The guy who had beaten me was apparently some stalker, confusing me for the girl that I mentioned above. He was arrested, however, I don't really know what happened to him, although he did get charged with assault and stalking. However, my memory is a little faded from that night. I hope this story can inspire others to not panic in a situation like this, but to get out of it ASAP. So I'm a 22-year-old female. For context that's important to my story, I have a pretty larger than average chest area. Now, I take the bus home every day from college. It's a route that's mostly comprised of college students either going to class or back home. One evening I stayed later, so I was on the bus when it was starting to get dark. The main rush times for students to be leaving was long past, so I was in a predominantly empty bus. One person who was on the bus already as I boarded was a woman. She was probably about 50 or so and looked at me with a smile as I got on. I'm a little shy, so I half smiled back and went to sit further at the back. The lady got up and placed herself in the seat in front of mine and immediately said, "I just had to say, I love your outfit." I was surprised, but she seemed harmless enough, so I just smiled and thanked her. I guess it takes a certain body type for that kind of dress. She pressed on, basically gesturing to my chest. Do you mind if I ask what size? She said, and from there on was just making really odd comments about my body, asking what it was like, how I must get so much attention from older men, and if I liked it. She was using her phone a lot as we spoke. She was really starting to make me uncomfortable, so I decided I'd just get off at the next stop and get a cab. But at the next stop, a guy got on, and he instantly made eye contact with the lady. He looked gnarly, to be honest, older than her and in dirty clothes with a phone in hand. He sat in a seat further from us, but he kept glancing over, looking at me really intently. The woman was looking at him in a way that made me feel certain that they knew each other, and it got way too weird for me, so I waited for a few minutes until the bus stopped in a crowded area.
There's no red airheads in here.
Got off.
Fucking hell.
The two looked at me but didn't follow, and once I was out of sight, I just ran for it. I don't know for sure what the hell was going on, but it seemed a lot like these two knew each other and something creepy was going on. I'm just glad I acted on instinct and left before something happened.
Save big on all your back-to-school needs, all in the Kroger app. Get juicy red, white, or black seedless grapes for $1.49 a pound with your card and a digital coupon. Then buy 2, get 2 free on 12 packs of delicious Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or 7-Up with your card. Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
I'm going to tell this story just to make people aware of the dangers they may be putting themselves in by selling items online. I get a message from someone telling me that they want to buy a specific item, and from the get-go, the person was pretty pushy. I wanted to make some money, so I responded. The whole time that I was talking to this person, something felt really off. This person, we'll just call A, was being a little bit weird from the first message. A kept changing the time that they were coming to get the item. A asked me if I had change for a certain amount, and I said no. This was before A got to my house to pick up the item. I told A that they needed to get change because I didn't have any cash. A ends up showing up and had parked around the corner somewhere so I couldn't see the car. I felt something was off because A handed me the incorrect amount and asked if I had change. I had already told A that I didn't. Then A proceeded to ask me to get in their car so we can go get change. I told A that I don't get in the car with strangers. A was like, oh, I'm from Europe and we don't worry about getting in strangers' cars. I'm thinking, yeah, okay. But I'm definitely not going. A also asked me a lot of questions about the watch. It was brand new and I had already told A this. Plus, it was just an ordinary wind-up watch to set the time. A went and got change, surprise, surprise. So when this person got back, I could see the car and a few other people were in the car. I had a really bad feeling, so I just grabbed the money, gave A the watch, and ran back inside. Am I making a big deal over this? If you
Oh, he's got health.
I will provide
Fuck
them,
me.
but thanks for listening. There is a reason why I have to be talked into camping every time it comes up in conversation with either friends or family. I don't mind the outdoors and I don't mind nature. I just feel like I want to sleep in bed and not on the ground in a tent. On this specific year, my boyfriend talked me into going camping, but this time, we would be staying in a cabin so I can sleep in a bed. I still voted for the ocean, but at least I was actually going to be sleeping in a bed. The The trip consisted of me and my boyfriend and 2 other couples. The 6 of us found a nice cabin in the woods that was mostly secluded and was only about a 100-yard walk to this beautiful lake that we could swim in. I didn't want to
Ow.
admit it, but I was
What the
actually
fuck was
feeling
that?
this trip quite a bit, especially once we got there. The first day was amazing. We spent all day walking some trails, swimming in the lake, and in the early evening we decided to cook up some steaks on the grill, and it was a great first day. That night we all went inside and went to bed at around midnight, if I had to guess. I didn't sleep very well. I thought that I could hear something outside all night, but I just chalked it up to my imagination. After all, we were in the woods, so hearing strange noises all night long is not that weird. The next morning, we were all outside getting ready for a nice hike when we heard this jolly voice shout from behind us. "Why, hello there! How are y'all doing today?"
Oh my god.
My boyfriend, being the always social butterfly that he is, started talking to the guy right away. He told us his name was Wayne and that he was an expert in all the trails around
I didn't know
here.
there was more.
And the whole interaction was just slightly strange, but I suppose not alarming. He said he lived nearby and that he was hiking some trails and he heard us talking and he just wanted to make sure that we were settling in okay. I remember thinking it was sweet of him to check in with us. He was a bigger guy, I would say well over 6 feet tall, and he had a pretty big gut. He had a backpack on with hiking boots and jeans, so he really didn't look like anything other than a typical hiking local. We thanked him, and he laughed in this jolly voice, and he went on his way. As we hiked, we laughed about Wayne for a little while. When the afternoon came, we all decided to go to the lake to swim for a few hours before heading back to the cabin. When we got down to the lake, we were sitting on the dock soaking up the sun, and from beyond the trees, we heard that voice again. "There they are!" We all jumped back because honestly it scared us, because now standing at the edge of the dock was Wayne again. We asked what he was doing, and again he claimed that he was just wandering by and happened to see all of us out there. My boyfriend laughed it off and talked with him for a little while, but my friend Tina's boyfriend and I felt uneasy about this. The entire time they were talking, Wayne just nodded, laughed, and kept looking around. After they finished their conversation, he kept mumbling, "Okay," under his breath and then walked away. It was weird, but not really scary, at least not yet. That night, as we were all sitting around the campfire sharing scary stories, I felt even more uncomfortable for some reason. Suddenly, Wayne jumped out of the bushes without warning and yelled in this sort of joking voice, "Here I am!" followed by a loud and excited laugh. We all jumped out of our skin, even worse than at the docks. At this point, my boyfriend was upset and kind of yelled at Wayne, telling him to just leave us alone and go back home. He explained that scaring us like that wasn't cool, and Wayne was lucky none of us retaliated out of instinct. Wayne looked upset and claimed that he was just trying to help us have some memorable experiences on our trip. He left on one of the trails, I guess, and he seemed to look pretty visibly upset. I almost felt sorry for him until I realized that it was after 11, and there was no good reason for him to be wandering around our camp. The experience put a damper on the rest of the night, and we ended up calling it a night not long after that. We went inside and cleaned up the place since we were supposed to be leaving early in the morning. Once in bed, I told my boyfriend that I wasn't feeling great about this whole Wayne situation. I had a bad feeling that he would somehow come out again. I couldn't stop thinking that weird noise that I heard the night before might actually be from this goofball. That night, I was wide awake again. I'm not sure of the time, but at some point during the night, I could distinctly hear breathing and footsteps outside the window. I woke up my boyfriend and begged him to check for me. He was annoyed at first, but then changed his tone instantly. I saw him look out, and his skin turned white as a ghost, and he whispered to me that he could see someone outside the cabin, pacing back and forth, and he thinks it's Wayne. I went to the window and tried not to draw any attention to us. What appeared to be Wayne seemed to be arguing with himself, talking but almost incoherently. He attempted to open the locked door, and when he couldn't, he started pounding his head as if upset with himself. And after pacing for a few more minutes, he seemed to just disappear back into the woods. We were horrified and didn't know what to do. My boyfriend called the owner of the cabin and informed him that we were also calling the police. A cop car showed up a few minutes later and we explained the entire day's events to the officer, including Wayne's appearance. The cop didn't seem too bothered and just simply nodded along. It felt like he was just sort of listening for the sake of listening and didn't grasp the potential severity of the situation. We packed up our stuff, made some coffee, and just stayed awake until dawn. And once the sun was rising, we loaded up the van and headed home. Once we got to the main road, we saw Wayne walking by himself. He still seemed to be just sort of mumbling to himself, hitting his head from time to time. We called the dispatcher and told them that we had just seen Wayne, who had been trying to break into our house earlier, walking on the road. And that was the end of it on our side. I'm not sure if the cops ever eventually picked him up, or if he just fled back into the woods. I wonder if he really does live nearby, or if he was just some strange man wandering around, hoping to cause harm. I'm happy nothing physically happened to us, but from now on, they all can go camping without me. So I'm just now writing this story hours after the most insane moment of my entire life. I know that may seem a bit dramatic, but at the moment it was absolutely insane. My family and I just arrived at our campsite for the week, and I'm on eggshells looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds, even though deep down, I'm sure I'm alright. So bear with me as I try to do my best that I can to tell this story, since it's the first time I'm recalling it since it just happened. So late last night, me and my family left our house to embark on our 1-week camping adventure. Our 2 kids were so excited to finally be able to join me and my wife on one of our camping adventures, and she and I had gone on all sorts of adventures over the years, but we wanted to wait until our kids were just a little bit older before involving them. Finally, that time had come for the kids to join us, and we set out on the 7-hour drive a little after midnight. After the initial excitement of leaving and the musical concert inside my truck was over, everyone fell asleep in the truck except for me, which is fine. It gave me a chance to listen to one of my audiobooks that I've been neglecting for some time. I was surprised when we were close to our destination, and I realized that my family had mostly been asleep for the entire drive. They would have brief moments of waking up and asking where we were, but they mostly stayed out cold for the entire trip. About 30 minutes until we reached the campsite, I got the dreaded flat tire that no driver wants to get, especially when on vacation. I was lucky to have my spare, so this was no more than an inconvenience, but I was still annoyed. I remember being scared as I briefly lost control of the car and slid to the side of the road before I regained control. Somehow, my family was still asleep. I quietly got out of the truck and uncovered the spare tire buried under all of our luggage. And while preparing to fix the tire, I started to wonder what I had hit. The flat tires seemed to appear out of nowhere, and for some reason I felt suspicious. I got the damaged tire off and replaced it with a spare. I was just finishing up changing the tire when I heard the light sound of someone clearing their throat. It sounded like my wife, but when I turned around, I was greeted by a small woman with wild dreadlocks and a tattoo of a rose on the middle of her neck.
I'm the dreadhead.
I said hello in a tentative and confused voice. The woman smiled, and she said in a sort of delicate voice, "Hi, I'm Summer. You look like you could use some help." I just smiled and said, "Thanks, Summer, but I think we'll be okay." I was trying to be polite, but I was not feeling great about the situation. This woman kept looking to the side of the road like she seemed to be communicating with someone, but whenever I looked over there, I didn't see anything. She kept on insisting on helping, never changing this nice and polite voice that she had, and I just kept saying no thank you. Eventually, I started to pack up the tools and get myself ready to hit the road, and that's when this woman said, "I think you really need my help." and then her voice changed sort of instantly. It wasn't this polite and delicate little voice anymore. It was angry, and almost a vicious voice as she said, "Let me help you." I was not having any of this anymore. I turned to the woman, and in the meanest voice I could muster up, I said, "Okay, lady, you need to leave. I got a family in the car and I'm not in the mood for all this crazy crap. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police right now or I'm taking care of this myself." I thought that my threat might do the trick, but instead, she just starts to laugh. I had enough and just turned around while she was laughing. I opened the driver's side door and put my keys in the cup holder, so all I had to do was push the start when I entered the truck. When I turned back around to grab the lug wrench, which is that cross-shaped wrench if you don't know what I'm talking about, I turned around to the woman, and she was about in mid-swing with this lug wrench, haphazardly attempting to strike me, presumably in the head. She didn't seem very lucid, and I was able to catch the blow with my hand, and I ended up just kicking her in the knees and shin, I guess, and she fell to the ground. She started grunting, and then began to run to the side of the road that she had kept looking at earlier. At this point, without wasting any time, I get in the truck, and I just sped off as fast as I could, constantly checking my mirror for any sign of this woman or any car following me. And thankfully, the last 30 minutes of my drive went by with no crazy people or issues.
Fucking A.
I did tell my wife when she woke up, and she was angry that I didn't just call the police right away, and she honestly didn't believe me. She called as soon as we got to the campsite and gave the police this entire description that I had told her about the woman. The name she gave, the tattoo, and exactly the road where she confronted me. And I can't help but feel that the woman is going to find me and my family at this campsite. She clearly saw that I had camping gear in my truck when she confronted me. I didn't realize it until later, but now I can't help but think that she was somehow responsible for causing that flat tire. But clearly I have no evidence to back that theory up. I'm gonna try and enjoy my trip, but I wanted to get the story out while the details were clearly in my head. Now I can't stop wondering what it is she wanted. Did she want my truck with that spare tire? Did she want to rob me? Or was it something much worse? Wish me luck on my trip. If anything happens or any new developments come to light with police or something, I'll be sure to update everyone, but until then, I hope I never see that woman with that rose tattoo ever again. This story took place approximately 15 years ago. My parents let me have two of my closest friends over, and they set up a tent for us to camp in the backyard. My mom bought a bunch of snacks, and my dad ordered us a pizza and drinks before they left to go out for dinner. We were so excited to be out in the tent, and we dragged as much food as we could to the backyard and started eating and just chatting. We went over to our schedule of scary stories, s'mores, and whatever else we had planned for the night. We ate as much dinner as we could and then started sharing stories of our crushes and if we had enough courage to ask them to dance when school started the following year. I remember we were trying to set up a blanket and pillow as a fort inside the tent, and we were unsuccessful. The whole time I felt like I heard something outside the tent, though. I unzipped the screen, or the window as you call it, so I could look outside the side of the tent, but I didn't see anything. And then about 5 minutes later, my friends said that they thought they heard something too, and it sounded like something brushed against the tent. Now my friend Audrey looked out the open screened window and said, "I feel like I see something in black over there. Do you see it?" As soon as I looked, I saw this sort of white Nike symbol jump out to me very quickly. I couldn't help it, but I screamed, followed by my friends screaming, and we ran into the house. We went into the bathroom and just locked ourselves in there. We tried to be as quiet as possible, but then we heard footsteps and the bathroom door began to jiggle. We all screamed at the top of our lungs, and Audrey was now on the phone with the police. While she was on the phone, we were still screaming, and then I heard my mom telling us to come out of the bathroom. We slowly opened the door, and my parents were standing there. Still on the phone with the police, my dad grabbed the phone and said, "I'm sorry, this is the father. I was just playing a joke on the girls during their sleepover." Being adults now, I'm surprised the cops didn't show up, but it is a small town and my dad knows everyone, so I'm sure he ended up talking to one of his friends and saying everything was all right. My friends and I were pretty angry at first, but my dad was a jokester and we got over it pretty quickly. He offered to get the fire started for us and help us with our s'mores. He played some light music and got the fire started for us in the backyard. He kept asking if there was anything else we needed at the store or inside, and I think he was feeling pretty guilty for actually scaring us so bad. We got tired pretty quickly and made our way to bed in the tents and just talked about anything and everything until we started dozing off and falling asleep one by one. I think I remember being the last one awake, wanting to make sure that my friends were comfortable and could fall asleep. I woke up suddenly, though, to pitch dark and the sound of crickets. I felt like I heard something, but maybe it was just a dream when I woke up. I heard one of my friends snoring and breathing pretty heavily. I hadn't noticed it before, but I assumed that they must have been completely zonked out. As I tried to doze back off, the breathing and snoring became louder, so I sat up to see if I could see which friend it was coming from. As I sat up,
Oh,
I was at
fuck.
eye level with the window screen and felt like I was having flashbacks from earlier and saw something move. Then all of a sudden, I heard the zipper from the tent door open. I yell, "Dad, knock it off. Earlier was enough. I want my friends to actually want to come over again." He didn't say anything back, and my friends were starting to stir around now. Annoyed that my friends were now going to be woken up, I said, "Dad, get out of here, please." I can still hear the response in my head, a voice that was not my father's, and much deeper said, "How do you know it's me?" My whole body felt like it froze, but the only thing I could think to do was grab my friend's hands and pull them. I basically dragged them,
Fuck that.
and we all ran inside. I don't remember anyone else screaming or yelling. I think my friends were more confused than anything else. I went right into my parents' room and told my dad what had happened. He seemed to jump right out of bed and went outside. I could hear him yelling something.
Oh my
and
god.
then he came back in and got on the phone. He told my mom to stay inside with me and my friends, and he waited outside. We eventually saw flashing lights. He was outside with the police for about 20 minutes, if I had to guess, and came back inside and talked to my mom first and then to me and my friends. He told us that there was a guy that seemed to be causing problems in the neighborhood that night, and thankfully they did catch him, and we were safe. He said he was so sorry for scaring us earlier and was happy everyone was okay. He asked my friends if they wanted to call their parents or go home. Aubrey was fine, and she said that she wanted to stay, but May called her mom and just went home. Aubrey and I decided to take our little camping night to the living room, and my dad got us comfortable and made an impromptu pillow and blanket fort for us. There were only a few hours until morning, and we got up early. My mom and dad made us breakfast and then asked if we wanted to have a pool day. I remember that day being exactly what we needed to get our minds off the night before. I'm still friends with Audrey to this day, and I honestly don't think either of us have been camping since then. This
I have
story
hella
happened to me
saddles.
a few years ago. Back when my wife was still my girlfriend, we decided to take an impromptu camping
Why is
trip.
it so fast?
I never camped much, other than a few times with a friend of mine. But my
Oh my
girlfriend used to camp
god,
all the
stupid
time with
ass
her family when
spirits,
she was
bro.
younger, and she really wanted to camp again. She thought it would be a great chance for her and me to spend some time together, away from all the noise of the city that she and I had lived in at the time. She went all out and bought all this awesome camping stuff. Among those items was a nice new tent. It was a bigger tent, especially for 2 people, but I didn't mind. More room was always okay with me since I was a bigger guy at the time of the story. The one thing I liked about this tent, which I found out later most tents have, was that it had this little window thing on it so you could see outside the tent at night. I knew that it was going to be dark, but just the ability to be able to see and then have the light shine in on us in the morning was a comforting thought for me. We arrived at this desolate location in the afternoon. We were only staying 2 nights, so we wanted to make the best of the trip. That first afternoon we didn't do much, we just kind of chilled, set up the tent, and went to bed early. I loved my little window in the tent. I was able to stare out of it while I was laying in my sleeping bag, and because of where the tent was located, I was able to see the night sky, and it was beautiful. Just as I expected, the light blasted through the window in the morning, and it was almost like waking up in my own bed. We got out of bed early and made the most of the day. We went fishing and hiking and was still able to spend a considerable amount of time just laying around relaxing, reading, and just enjoying the sun. We were on track to having another early night, and I was all right with that. Neither one of us has ever been a night owl, and we were beat from everything we did earlier in the day. We got all cozy in the tent, and I made sure I propped my window screen open. While I was starting to drift off, I thought I noticed something outside the tent. It kind of looked like movement, but I didn't know if I had dozed off for a second or if I really saw something. I sat up, and before I could get a good look, my girlfriend goes, "Did you see that too?" I told her I thought I saw something, but I wasn't sure. We both sat up and stared out of our little tent window. It just looked like a peaceful night. And then my girlfriend gasped. It sounded like air had been sucked out of her. To this day, I still have never seen the expression that she had in that moment. Sitting on a tree branch about 30 or 40 feet away was a person. They were wearing one of those weird fake president masks. And while sitting in the tree, they were sort of just kicking their feet back and forth like a child on a swing would do. We both just sat there like sitting ducks. I was terrified because we hadn't seen one other person the entire time that we were at this campsite, and now all of a sudden, this creep with a mask on was so close to us. I felt like crying, but I was trying to be brave since my girlfriend was already in tears. I know the person wasn't directly doing anything to us, but the unsettling nature of the situation made us both so uncomfortable. We watched the guy for probably about 5 minutes just sitting there in that tree, and then he jumped down. The person still never approached the tent, but that feeling that they were going to rush us at any second never went away. It felt like forever that the person was just pacing around and then finally just stopped. He didn't move forward, he didn't sway, he just stood still like a statue. A couple of minutes later, the person turned around, and now they were facing the tent head-on. We could hear them laughing under the mask, and the person started to wave right at us. Even with the mask on, it felt like the person was staring directly at me, and the wave wasn't just a subtle little wave. The person was erratically moving their hand back and forth like they were trying to get their hand to fall off of something. And then the person just stopped waving abruptly, and in a muffled voice that we could barely hear from under that mask, we heard the guy yell, "Bye, guys." And then he literally ran full speed off into the woods. We just sat there and continued staring out of the window all night long. We both may have dozed off at different points, but we mostly stayed awake for the entire night. The guy in the mask never came back, and there was no evidence of where he came from. That was the most disturbing part. Whoever this was, he knew that we were there. We had no idea how long he had been in that tree. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. I guess all things considered, we're lucky since nothing technically happened to us. Even though we were physically unharmed, mentally this left us messed up for a while, and we're still thinking about it to this day. We've gone camping several times since that night, but from now on, we'll only stay in a cabin with doors that can lock. can't believe the story is over 10 years old now. Time really does fly if you're not careful. So this story is probably one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me, and at the time, it was incredibly scary as well. I had recently started dating my girlfriend, and due to our schedules, I rarely saw her, and as a young man in my 20s during the events of this story, I really wanted to see her. More than anything, I wanted alone time with her, and unfortunately, it just seemed like there was never a chance for us to be alone. I still lived at home with my parents, and so did she, so alone time wasn't really something we had much of. We had only been dating for a little while, and I was already annoyed. It seemed like she had something going on every night or weekend, and I just honestly felt like an afterthought to her. One weekend I told her how I was feeling, and she responded by telling me that she had planned on a camping trip with her friends and that she was really sorry that we couldn't hang out again. I was furious, and at this point I was close to ending things with her before they had progressed any further. That day, she left for the trip and she texted me and said, "Sorry, I know this is last minute, but my friend said that you could come if you want to meet us there." I absolutely hate camping, but I wasn't going to miss this chance to hang out with my girlfriend. The campsite was only about 40 minutes from my house, so I packed my bag and headed out there. This was a weird place. It wasn't like camping in the middle of the woods camping. It was in a sort of wooded area, but the campsite itself was the big giant clearing that had dozens of other people camping out. It didn't seem private and certainly didn't feel like camping to me, at least what I thought of when I thought of camping. Once I got there, this is where I first met all of her friends. They all seemed like great people, and I was kind of excited to hang out with all of them that night. They were the opposite of my girlfriend, though. She was quiet and reserved, and all of her friends were very outgoing and loud, and they all had an awesome sense of humor. While we were all hanging out, that is when I noticed a bunch of trails in the woods. Once I started walking some of the trails, I started to realize just how big this place was, and it finally started to feel like what I thought of when I thought of camping. Earlier that night, we grilled some food on a portable grill and played some card games. Once the sun set, we drank some beers in special containers since we weren't allowed to have alcohol. Around 11 p.m., 2 people came over to our little section of tents. I don't know if we should call them park rangers or what, but they were basically in charge of the campsite and the surrounding trails. They started to shine flashlights in our area very aggressively and wanted to know why we were still awake. We all laughed and looked at each other very confused. One of the guys who was there in this sort of arrogant voice said, "Why wouldn't we be awake? It's our vacation. We're planning on staying awake for a while, hanging out." One of the rangers, in a very aggressive voice, immediately jumped down his throat and said, "There's a strict 10 o'clock curfew. All lights out." We just laughed, still thinking this was some sort of weird joke. Her one friend, the same one who spoke up before, said again, "I paid all this money for this campsite, and you're literally making me go to sleep earlier? Why don't you get out of here?" I don't know if I would have had the same response, but we all felt the same way. The woman basically yelled at us like we were children. Frustrated, we all started making our way back into our tents. One of the friends said, "It's okay, guys, let's just meet in my tent and play some cards and keep quiet." Well, the ranger must have heard her because she turned around, got right back in her face and said, "Lights out means lights out. No cards, no talking. It's time for bed. I'll be making rounds again soon. If you guys are still awake, you're gone." This was weird and ridiculous. I felt like some little kid, and I couldn't believe that those people were making grown adults go to sleep like this was prison or something. Once she walked away, everyone I was with was stewing with anger. We were behaving like she wanted, mainly because we had been drinking, and if she wanted to kick us out, we would have been screwed because none of us were okay to operate a vehicle. It wasn't long until everyone basically fell asleep except for me and my girlfriend, who were just enjoying our time together. Then she suggested something that I couldn't believe. She said that we should sneak onto one of the trails so we could have some true alone time. As I said before, I was a young man in my early 20s, so this was all I needed to hear. We quietly slid out of the tent and we sneakily made our way over to one of the nearby trails. Once we were a good distance from the start of the trail, we started to really enjoy our alone time. But then the enjoyment ended instantly. We heard a man shout, "Hey, and we both froze, trying not to bring attention to ourselves. We were sure that it was another park ranger, so we thought that it was best to just stay still. Then this deep voice spoke up again. "I know you're here. I just want to say hi." And we both each looked confused. What was that supposed to mean? I started to peek around one of the trees, even though it was nearly pitch black. Standing on the path with this little flashlight was a very strange-looking man. He was short and kind of wearing an oversized white t-shirt. While I was peeking, he made eye contact with me and saw me instantly. He stood straight up and smiled, and he said, "Hey, buddy, I got something for you." This situation was already weird, and I felt very tense being in the woods with this strange dude. I didn't respond because I had no idea what to say. And then he said one of the most convoluted things I had ever heard when he says, "I got all this money in my pocket. My ex-wife is going to take it, so I want to give it away before she finds out. Just come over here and grab it, would you?" He held out his hand, but it had nothing in it. He was about 20 feet away, so thankfully we weren't right on top of each other. I looked at my girlfriend and mouthed the words, "Run," to her. And as soon as she fled, I followed closely right behind her. Right as I went to take off, I looked at the guy who shouted something like, "No," and then he briefly lunged in my direction, but I was already sprinting away before he could even commit to some move. We ran as fast as we could out of the woods, and it never appeared like we were being followed, though. Once we got back to camp, we waited about an hour for the rangers to make a walkthrough, and I grabbed the lady from before and told her that some man was walking the woods. I lied and told her that I could see him from the tent, and she did believe me. They notified the authorities, and that's the last I saw of the creepy man in those woods. The rest of the night, my eyes were just glued in the direction of the trails, waiting to catch a glimpse of that stranger, but thank God I never did. I have no idea what he wanted that night, but the look in his eyes when we darted away was something I'll never forget. Every year around this time, when people start camping a lot, I'm reminded of that horrible encounter in the woods, and I'm just thankful that we were far enough away from him that we were able to get away safely. About 5 years ago, my wife and I took a trip to Colorado. I don't know how she always does it, but she found this awesome place for us to camp out at. Whenever I try to find any destination for us, I fail miserably. It's one of the many reasons why I love her. She always has a plan and she keeps me on track, which is great since I'm the most indecisive person I know. Basically, we had free reign to camp wherever we wanted in this area. I drove our truck to the perfect spot, and then we started setting up our tent, grill, music, and everything else we would need to make this an awesome trip. We were planning on staying 5 nights, and unfortunately, we only made 3. I'm sure you would leave too if you experienced what we had experienced on that 3rd night. The first few days were great. Unlike a lot of camping destinations in the United States, this part of the country was different. Maybe it's just me because I grew up on the East Coast, but when I think camping, I think trees, lakes, and slasher movies from the 80s. But instead, this area was filled with mountains, sand, and an entirely different type of vegetation I was used to on the other side of the country. I fell in love instantly with the area that we were in, and I made sure that I was living each day to the fullest. Probably the best part of this specific trip, though, was the fact that there was nobody there. In 3 days, we hadn't seen one person, and where that may seem creepy to some people, for us, this is perfect. Then the dreaded 3rd night came. The day was awesome, just like the previous days. We hiked some mountain trails, and we were a bit more exhausted than we had been. We took it easy that night and got into our tent early. I think the last time I looked at the time, it was around 9 p.m. Not long after looking at the time, I fell asleep, and my wife did as well. I woke up several hours later to my wife shaking me. I was concerned and asked her what was going on. she was holding a finger up to her lips, gesturing to be quiet and pointing outside the tent. I was quiet, but I didn't know what I was listening to. She eventually sort of mouthed the words to me, "I think there might be an animal out there." I laughed because I remember thinking that it was cute that she was afraid of an animal. In hindsight, that was very stupid of me because there are a number of animals in that area that could have easily ripped us to shreds if they wanted to. I began listening some more since I didn't hear anything right away, and then I heard the growl. It was the weirdest growl I had ever heard in my life. Not that I'm some animal expert, but this growl was strange. It didn't feel deep and guttural like the sound of a bear growling. It was more like this weak attempt at a growl. I was thinking that maybe some dying animal was out there. And then I started to remember some article that I had read about a coyote with rabies or something, and it went crazy and attacked a bunch of people. The footsteps of the animal outside of the tent sounded light, so whatever this creature was, it was small, like a coyote. I didn't want to take any chances with this beast. When I heard the creature make some distance away from the tent, I slowly unzipped it and told my wife to just get in the truck. Once the zipper was fully unzipped, we didn't see anything, so we both quickly jogged over to the truck
Axe,
and I
pickaxe,
unlocked the
shovel.
doors and we dove in. Once we were inside, we were looking out of the tinted windows and trying to get a glimpse of whatever creature was making that noise. A few minutes passed and we still didn't see anything. No movement whatsoever. I know something was out there. Not only did I hear the footsteps, but we could clearly hear the strange growl. My wife started to fall asleep again, and this time I jolted her awake. I screamed because what I saw was not a creature. It was in fact a human being. It was a very wild-looking guy with long hair and seemingly a beard. He was walking sort of hunched over and just making these growling noises that we'd heard before. I was angry, and I was just about ready to get out of my truck and confront this guy, and then the nightmare got worse. Just beyond where we had our tent set up, 3 more men walked into our camp area. It looked like they were seemingly whispering and laughing to one another. 3 of the 4 guys were carrying these huge sticks, at least I think they were sticks. One of the guys, without notice, then pulled the stick all the way back behind his head and forcibly swung the stick down on top of our now empty tent. I heard the one guy yell something, which made me think that this guy must have thought that we were still in the tent. Fight or flight mode kicked in immediately. I started the truck and drove off as fast as I could, leaving the tent and all those creeps in the dust. I didn't even look back to see his facial expression or anything. I just drove as fast as I could and as far away as I could. While we were driving, my wife waited until we finally got service, and then she called the police and told them what had happened. I think she was put in touch with a park ranger or someone like that because some type of law enforcement called her phone a few times. We never went back for the tent or any of our stuff, which was fine with us. The park ended up charging me some sort of fee for leaving all of my stuff there and technically canceling my reservation early by leaving after 3 days. The law enforcement was sympathetic, but the people who operated the camping at the park didn't care at all on what we had been through and still charged us fees, claiming that it was policy. At the end of the day, it was a small price to pay for the luxury of continuing my life unharmed. And I sincerely hope that whoever those monsters were, I hope that they're caught and are incapable of causing anyone else harm. A lot of people hate the city, but I would rather take the city over the wilderness any day of the week, especially after what happened to me and my friends a year ago. My one friend had just separated from her fiancé, who she had been with for about 7 years, and she wasn't doing super great with the breakup, which of course I don't blame her. Our other friend, who is the outdoorsy type, suggested that we go away for a night and just camp out in the woods. Surprisingly, our friend was into the idea. So the three of us found this cute little cottage in the middle of the woods to camp out in for a night. I was excited to have a night out with my girls that wasn't in the city and wasn't all about getting dolled up and all that jazz. Of course, once we got there, though, my one recently separated friend got bored, which I knew was going to happen. She started looking up local bars in the area and eventually found this dive bar in a nearby town. Now, this was my idea of camping. At least, that's what I joked with my friends about. It was still a nice change of pace, though. We went to this local bar, and it was nice not to have to worry about the city scene while we were at this place. It was a handful of locals at the bar, and that's pretty much it. At least as far as I could tell, anyway. My friend started up a conversation with one of the guys at the bar. It was a middle-aged man, but he was handsome in a rugged kind of way. I don't know if it was the alcohol or just the feeling of being depressed, but whatever it was, she was flirting very heavily with this man. And this went on for a while, but eventually she separated from him and told us that she was ready to head back to the cottage. On the way back to the cottage, we were giving her a hard time about her bar friend, and she just laughed it off, claiming that it wasn't that big of a deal. We get back to the cottage, and all we had was a glass of wine before we decided to go off to bed for the evening. It was clear at this point that camping was not for us. We hated being in this little cottage with no Wi-Fi and really nothing to do. I know our one friend meant well by setting this whole thing up, but it wasn't a good time. We all decided to sleep in the living room together. One of us on the couch, one of us on the love seat, and one of us in the recliner. And it didn't take long for all of us to fall asleep. A little after 3 in the morning, I was being nudged by one of my friends who looked very concerned. She told me that she had heard the doorknob kind of jiggling. I laughed at her and told her that she was being crazy, and that's when I heard it. It really was shaking, and not just a little bit. Whoever was out there was really trying to get into the cottage. We were too scared to get up, so we just cuddled up together on the couch and held the blanket up to our faces. Since the cottage was so small, you could walk from the front door around the entire building in no time at all. And to our horror, that's what this person did. We listened to each step outside the cottage. They were clearly sneaking, but we could hear each little twig snap after each step. The person made their way around to the back of the cottage, which was behind the couch that we were laying on. There was a large window at the back. The person went to the window, and we started to hear the shuffling sound on the other side of the curtain. And then it occurred to us, the person was trying to open it. I don't know what got into me, but I decided to yell, "I'm calling the police!" The noise stopped for a moment, and then a whisper could be heard from the other side of the window. It seemed to be a man's voice, and he was whispering the name of my friend. The same friend who was flirting with that one man at the bar. My mind thought about the guy right away, and I refused to believe that he followed us here, but there was no other way that he'd know we were at this house. I whipped open the curtain, and like a deer in the headlights, the man just stood there. It was in fact the man from the bar. He put his hands up in this sort of defensive position like he was the one who was in trouble, and then he just ran. He didn't get into a car, at least none that I saw. We did phone the police right away and report what could have been a potential home invasion, and I'm not sure anything ever came of it, since we left first thing in the morning, which wasn't that long after the cops left. It wasn't until the drive home that we really got ourselves worked up and scared, and that's when we started to piece together everything. We got back to the cottage before midnight, and
What
this
the
guy didn't
fuck?
try breaking in until after 3. That means that he had to follow us to know where the cottage was, wait for us to sleep, and then try to get in. The thought of this man lurking outside for all those hours makes me want to throw up. I'm so thankful that my friend woke up to the doorknob noise, because if she didn't, I don't know what would have happened. We found out after the fact that the window was unlocked, and it would have only been a matter of time before he would have broke in. In a sick way, this trip really did help my friend, because she was so thankful to escape unharmed that she was able to pull her life into perspective and start the long road of healing. after a horrible breakup. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you get a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. My mom had warned me not to work at a bar, but they were hiring and I had just turned 21, so the thought of working around alcohol all day seemed kind of fun to me. It was also a restaurant at night, so I really didn't think it would be as sketchy as she was saying it would be. My first few months working there were great. We'd have the occasional bar fight, but it was nothing that anyone needed to be concerned about, just drunk people doing what they do. That was before a woman started coming in every night, obviously high on something and constantly just wanted to start trouble. She'd pick fights with other women and try to hit on men who clearly wanted nothing to do with her. She got beat up so severely one night that when I found her outside, I actually thought she was dead. I called an ambulance for her and they took her to the hospital. I didn't know what happened to her after that until around 3 weeks later, and she came into the bar again. Only this time, she wasn't drunk or high, and she thanked me for saving her life. She said me caring about her enough to get her help made her rethink her life choices, and that she was getting better. I was happy for her until she told me that she was so happy that I was in love with her. I didn't even know what to say. I definitely wasn't in love with her, and actually have no idea how she had gotten that impression, but she did, and I was kind of concerned about it. I didn't know if she was dangerous, so I tried to be as nice and sensitive as possible when I told her that I wasn't in love with her, and helped her out because she obviously didn't deserve any of that. Her face turned from a happy expression to an extremely angry one. She started yelling at me that I was lying and just didn't want to profess my love for her in front of everyone else in front of the bar. And I was getting embarrassed since everyone in the place actually started to stare. I asked her to calm down, but she seemed to be having some sort of just freak out like she was a little kid. She said she'd only stop if I admitted I loved her, so, against my better judgment, I did just that. I said that I loved her and that she needed to leave before I changed my mind. And that seemed to settle her down, and she was happy with my quote-unquote confession. She giggled and said that she'd see me later, and walked out of the bar. I breathed a sigh of relief when the door closed behind her and everyone in the bar started to actually laugh. And I eventually turned in because of what had happened was somewhat comical, but a part of me was concerned for the future and if she would come back and do the same thing the next day. I had asked my girlfriend to meet me at the bar that night because she was going to be spending the night at my place. It was just after 2 a.m. and my girlfriend walked into the bar and I made my way over to her. I put my arm around her shoulders and she had hers around my waist as we exited the building. Unfortunately, something neither of us would expect had happened. The woman who had made me confess my love earlier had decided to wait for me.
Oh, I don't
outside
think
the
I'm
bar.
supposed to be here.
When she saw me with my girlfriend, she was furious. She started screaming that I was cheating on her and was asking how I could do that to the woman I love. My girlfriend was so confused, but I just told her that that woman was nuts. The woman didn't seem to like that at all. She screamed that if I thought that she was crazy, she'd show me just how crazy she could actually be. I thought she was going to pull out a knife or something, but instead, she just walked away down the road until we couldn't see her anymore. My girlfriend laughed a little, but I could tell that she was uncomfortable with what had just happened. I told her it would be okay and that she was probably just trying to scare us. Unfortunately, she had. The next week, the woman continued to come into the bar and would sit in my section as she tried to flirt with me all day. I refused and ignored her advances, but it didn't seem to deter her at all. Then, she'd wait outside for me to leave and she'd follow me to my car. I was finally over it when she grabbed my butt as I was unlocking my car door. In my mind, that justified me pushing her to the ground, and so that's what I did. She looked shocked and confused, but I didn't care. I just yelled at her to leave me alone and that I'd call the cops if she ever stepped foot on that property ever again. I got in my car and I drove away as she still laid there on the ground. I didn't realize doing that would cause the problems it did, but you can't really predict what a druggie will do when you make them mad. A few days after that happened, my girlfriend told me that she had started seeing that woman around town and it was starting to freak her out. She felt like she
Chat.
was
We're gonna
following
take an
her on
intermission.
purpose, and she feared that
What's going on, chat? We're gonna load back in. Delicioso. Char. Char.
He was going to do something to physically hurt her. I told her that she was most likely harmless, but if she wanted to, she could stay with me for a while, and I'd go out with her wherever she needed to go. She agreed, and after work every day, she'd meet me at the bar and would drive to my place behind me. We did everything together, and I started to notice the woman everywhere we went as well. I didn't like the feeling that I was getting being followed by her, but I didn't feel like confrontation would be the right decision. It only became an actual issue when we were leaving a store around 8 p.m. and it was dark outside and she was waiting for us at my car. My girlfriend was at the passenger side door when I heard her grunt and fall against the car. I saw the woman behind her, smiling this insane smile, and as I ran around to the other side and yelled at her to get away, I noticed that she was holding a knife that now had blood on it. My girlfriend screamed that she had just been stabbed, and I did what I had to do to protect her and prevent her from getting stabbed again. I jumped at this woman who had just stabbed the love of my life and took her to the ground. I started punching her in the face and grabbed the knife from her hand and threw it away from us. The woman was begging for me to stop and saying she loved me over and over, but at that point I didn't care. I got up from the ground and kicked her as hard as I could in the stomach to make sure that she wasn't going to get up, and I rushed over to my girlfriend. I saw the blood staining her shirt and she was starting to get weak. I pulled out my phone and I called 911. Officers arrived before the ambulance, but were able to help control the bleeding at least a little bit. They arrested the woman, who still continued to say that she loved me, as they put her in the back of the patrol car. I asked what was going to happen to her, and they said that they were going to take her to the hospital since I had beaten her so badly. An ambulance arrived shortly after, just as my girlfriend started to lose consciousness. She had lost a lot of blood and needed help as soon as possible. I met the ambulance at the nearest hospital that had a trauma center, and she was taken directly into surgery. You see, the woman had nicked her abdominal aorta, which caused massive internal and external bleeding. The only reason she survived was because the aorta hadn't burst, and the trauma team at the hospital was ready to receive her before she even showed up. The woman was charged with first-degree attempted murder and was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. I was happy with the sentencing, and even happier that my girlfriend was able to make a full recovery. And all in all, it probably wasn't my smartest idea to work at that bar, and was not intentional to make this woman fall in love with me. But honestly, who could have predicted someone would become so obsessed with me? My best friend and I decided to get jobs at the same place. It was this diner that had the look like it was from the 50s, even though it had only been open for a few years. We were excited to work together, but it ended up being the worst decision I ever made. The problems really stemmed from the fact that we were both incredibly competitive people. Both of us wanted to be the best employee, and it turned into a competition that actually made us hate each other. We were constantly trying to outdo one another, and I got tired of it quickly. I started dating one of our coworkers. His name was Jim. He was super sweet to me, and I had a crush on him for quite a while. The problem was that I had no idea my ex-best friend, Tina, also had a crush on him. We hadn't spoken on a personal level for months, so there was no way that I would have known about it. But to be honest, in reality, even if I did, it probably wouldn't have changed anything. We hadn't been friends for a while. Jim and I were respectful when it came to showing our affection at work. We knew a lot of people didn't like PDA, so most of our affection on the job consisted of smiling maybe winking at each other, that kind of thing. Anytime Tina saw this, she'd just kind of scoff and act like she was going to throw up. I thought she was just being childish and tried not to think anything of it, but it stopped being childish and turned into her doing everything she could to sabotage me every day at work. I knew she wanted to get me fired, but her obsession with it got way too excessive. Scheduling was handled by our district manager. I had a very specific schedule set up because I was taking some college courses a few days a week. I had showed up for my Monday shift at 4:30 p.m., and the second I walked in, my manager started yelling at me for being late. I was confused because I always came in at 4:30 on Mondays, but he pointed to the schedule, and according to that, I was over 6 hours late. I was given a formal warning, and Tina was standing right there, smirking at me. It was obvious she had something to do with it, but I didn't want any more issues that day, so I just left it be. It got worse the next week when I had cleaned the bathroom out at the end of the day, and I hated cleaning the bathroom, but it had to be done. Our manager went around the restaurant after we had closed to make sure everything was looking good so we could all leave, but when he came out of the bathroom, his face was pale and he was gagging. He could barely stand upright, and when the door opened, the smell was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. He screamed and asked why the bathroom hadn't been cleaned. I was adamant that I had cleaned it only 30 minutes before then, so he told me to go look at the clean bathroom and let him know if I still thought it was clean. I walked in and was met with the horrible stench of, well, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And it was everywhere. Someone had relieved themselves in that bathroom and hadn't even attempted to make it to the toilet. It was on the walls, the floors, the sinks, everywhere. And I ran out of the bathroom and had tears coming down my face. I was trying hard not to, but I threw up right there on the floor. I was confused and disgusted, but also knew for a fact that it was Tina. She was the only one who had gone in there after we had closed, and no matter how much I wanted to believe that she wasn't capable of doing something like that, it was clearly her. She started laughing as she watched me get sick over the mess she had made. I accused her of it in front of everyone, but she denied it. She even started crying and said I was awful for saying that she would do something like that, and obviously I had noticed it before and just didn't want to clean it up. Of course, everyone believed her. Her plan didn't go as well as she had hoped, though, because our manager absolutely was not going to allow any of us to clean it up. We had to hire an actual hazmat team to come in and clean that crap up because it was considered too toxic for someone not trained to clean up human waste like that. I'm not even kidding. And I got a text later that night from Tina that was just a bunch of poop emojis followed by laughing emojis. I couldn't believe I was actually friends with her before. The week after that happened, I showed up for work and Jim was furious with me. I asked him why, over and over again, but he wouldn't talk to me at all. I opened my locker in the back, and inside was a printed out picture of a screenshot apparently of me texting Tina and telling her I had cheated on Jim. I told him it was photoshopped and even let him look through my phone, but it didn't matter. He broke up with me right then and there, and Tina decided to rub the salt in the wound, so to speak. And that same week, she told our manager that I was interested in him and that I was too scared to tell him. This, of course, wasn't true, and all it did was make for the most uncomfortable day of my life anytime I walked over to him. He made sure to stand almost 5 feet away from me at all times. I didn't know why, and finally asked him and was shocked to hear that he thought I wanted to start a relationship with him. I told him it wasn't true, but clearly he didn't believe me. Tina also started rumors with our other coworkers saying I was talking behind their backs and saying awful stuff about them. She made everyone at the restaurant despise me, and no matter how much I wished I could tell you that this was a happy ending, it just wasn't. I was fired only 2 months after putting up with Tina's antics. I had told our manager that it was her who was behind everything and that I was a good employee, but he just told me that I should get help for my obvious mental issues. I turned in all of my work clothes and didn't even bother saying bye to everyone since they all hated me anyway. I ended up getting super depressed after that. No other place in town wanted to hire me because Tina had sent a mass email to most local restaurants telling them about what had happened at the diner. I guess a bad reputation, false or not, really does follow you. I ended up moving back in with my parents in my hometown a few states away and was able to find a job doing something I actually liked. Last I heard, Tina still worked at the diner, which does make me feel a little bit better knowing she's probably not happy. As for me, I'm relatively happy, but still getting very paranoid when making friends at work. I just really don't want to meet another person like Tina and have to go through that all over again. This happened around the time I was 16 and had just started my first job. It was a breakfast place that was open all hours of the day and was around 20 minutes from where I lived. I'd been working there for around a month when I started noticing the same guy coming in every single day, and he always asked me to be the one to take his order. He seemed friendly at first, but it started getting creepy when he began asking my coworkers about me. He would sit in the restaurant for hours just staring at me. I told my managers how uncomfortable it made me, but they refused to do anything about it because he apparently spent so much money at the restaurant every week. They didn't want to jeopardize getting that income since it was a small local restaurant that didn't make much money to begin with. I tried changing my scheduling around times that I knew he didn't come in, but he seemed to just adapt. He learned my new schedule quickly and fit himself into it. It started making me so severely uncomfortable that I knew I wasn't going to be able to put up with it for much longer. It reached its peak when he was caught taking pictures under my skirt as I was taking his order. I was looking down at my notepad and saw him reaching his phone under my skirt. I screamed and I kicked his hand, instinctually really, and my manager came out, and as I was running towards the back of the restaurant, he stopped me and asked me what was wrong. I told him what happened, and finally they were willing to do something about what I'd been telling them was happening for months. He walked up to this perv and yelled at him in his face and that he had to leave. I didn't see what happened exactly because I was hiding in the back room, but I could hear their conversation clear as day. The guy denied taking any pictures and said that he wasn't going to leave, but the second my manager threatened to call the police and have them search his phone, he agreed to go. My manager came into the back room that I was in and told me how sorry he was that they let it get to that point where the guy felt so emboldened to do what he did because he'd never been confronted for his inappropriate behavior before. I thanked him, but I was still mad that it was something I ever had to go through in the first place. Something should have been done the second that man did something to make me uncomfortable, but money meant more than my safety, apparently. They let me leave for the day, and my manager was nice enough to walk me to my car in case this guy was waiting outside for me. He wasn't, but it was better to be safe than sorry. I got in my car and just started sobbing. I felt like the police should have still been called, but when I mentioned that to my manager, he said he didn't want all that unnecessary drama at the restaurant and that it would only make them look bad. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let it go. I decided it would be best to go straight from the restaurant to the police station that day to file a report. And thank God they took me seriously. It was such a breath of fresh air to see concern in someone else's face when I told them what had been going on. It made me feel validated for the way I felt about the situation. The officer told me that I needed to quit that job before what was happening turned into a full-blown stalker situation. And believe me, I wanted to, but I just couldn't afford to leave a job that took me way too long to find. There weren't many places to work in town that I lived in, and I really needed the money, so I guess you could say that I was putting money before my safety too. I told the officers I wouldn't be able to quit, so being the awesome people they were, they offered to show up at the restaurant after my shifts to make sure that I got home okay. You may be thinking there's no way, but it was a really small town and they had nothing else to do. One of the officers knew my dad back in the day and wanted to make sure nothing bad happened to me, and the next couple of weeks went by without incident. There was no sign of the guy, but I was still so grateful to the officers who'd made good on their word and escorted me home every day I got off of work. I was finally starting to feel better about going to work since it had been a little while since I'd last seen him, but of course that couldn't last forever. It was a regular Friday night at the restaurant. My manager and other coworkers had left for the night, and I just had to clean the bathroom before locking up. I saw the police car pull up outside the front doors and was grateful that I'd be leaving soon. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and made my way into the bathroom. It had already been swept and mopped, so I just had to wipe down the sinks and clean the toilets. I opened the first stall and did what I had to do, but as I was wiping, I heard a slight cough, almost like someone was clearing their throat. My heart started to race, and I wanted nothing more than to just run out of there, but if there was someone in there, I didn't want them to know that I knew. I stepped out of the stall and slowly made my way towards the bathroom door, and just as I was about to pull it open, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, and there he was. I didn't know how long he'd been there waiting for me, and I really didn't want to find out what he planned to do to me in that bathroom. I asked him what he was doing there, and that we were closed, but no matter how creepy I found him, there was no way I could have prepared myself for his response. He just started touching himself as he said, "Oh, I just want you so bad. I'm so into you and you're so sexy. Please, please just let me have you." He paused for a few seconds before saying, "Or I can always just take you." Tears were beginning to well up in my eyes, and I was trying to think of an escape plan that could get me out of that restaurant and to the officer before he could get me. But fight or flight kicked in, and I turned around, opened the door, and just started running as fast as I could towards the front of the restaurant. I heard the guy's footsteps behind me as he was starting to catch up to me, and I had begun to panic. I didn't know if my heart was racing because of the running or because I knew that he was so close to reaching me. I was only a few feet from the door when I felt his body press against me as he took me to the floor. I started to scream and kick and fight back as much as possible, but the guy was strong and he was heavy. I felt like there was no way that I was going to be able to fight him off. I looked around for anything I could find to hit him with, but the only thing I was able to grab onto was a pen that I had dropped earlier in the day. I snatched it off the floor, and I went with my first instinct. I stabbed it directly into his eye. He yelled in pain, and his body flew backward off of my body, giving me the opportunity to get up, open the door, and scream for the officer outside. He saw me and immediately got out of his car and drew his gun. He called for backup on his walkie-talkie and was inside the restaurant, holding this man down at gunpoint before I knew it. Several more officers arrived, as well as an ambulance to check me out, but I only had minor scrapes and bruises. The man was arrested, and as of this moment, he's still awaiting trial. I just hope that I can get justice and he can be put away for a long time, so no other woman has to experience what I did at the hands of the man who could have easily ruined or ended my life. In the early summer of 2020, right in the middle of lockdown, me and my girlfriend, now wife, decided to pack up and leave New York City. I won't bore you with all the logistical, political, and financial reasons, but since she has family down in Texarkana, we figured that was a good place to stay as any. We got more bang for our buck down there than if we stayed up on the East Coast, and we figured if we missed New York after a year or so, we could always just move back once everything had blown over. We ended up finding this nice little rental house, one that was actually cheaper than what we were paying for our Manhattan apartment, and we had all of our stuff moved in by the end of June. Then one day, as we were coming back from grocery shopping, we happened to spot our neighbors from across the street. Since it was our first time seeing them, we figured that we'd go over and say hi, but as I got closer, I realized why we hadn't seen them around so much. The chick of the half-couple was heavily pregnant, and she greeted us with this big smile as we walked over to introduce ourselves. We made a little small talk. I specifically remember talking about barbecue recommendations with them, and then we just sort of parted ways. A few weeks later, my girlfriend's mom came over to visit us with this sort of care package, but when she was leaving, we spotted the neighbors from across the street again. They just pulled into their driveway, and the guy was helping his heavily pregnant wife out of their car, so we just said hey as we were walking my girl's mom to her car. Before she got into her car and drove off, we made plans to meet up for some dinner sometime. But while we were talking, my future mother-in-law kept shooting glances over at the pregnant couple. Call it your typical male ignorance, but I really didn't think anything of it at the time. Only later, my girl mentions how her mom had said something kind of weird. She did it in that sort of, I want to talk about it, but I don't feel comfortable initiating kind of way. And we'd been dating that long that I knew that it was my job to sort of poke and prod until the whole story came out. I was kind of worried that it was something personal, so what came next was weirdly relieving. But I mean, heavy emphasis on weird because, well, you'll see. My girl and her mom had been texting back and forth after she arrived back home in Paris, Texas, not French. When almost out of the blue, she'd said something to the effect of, "Your neighbor is faking her pregnancy." Right away, I'm thinking, how in the world could she possibly tell just from looking at her? But at the time, my future mother-in-law isn't crazy. In fact, she's incredibly level-headed and just about the best mother-in-law a guy could ask for. It's not like she'd just throw out an accusation like that out there without a good reason. And then there was the fact that my mother-in-law is a mother of 5, with my girl being the youngest, so it made sense that a woman who'd spent half a decade making babies would know a thing or two about the whole process. But if that was the case, how could she have possibly been hiding it from her husband? Well, according to my mother-in-law, either the husband was as dumb as a rock, or he knew his wife was faking it. But still, the question remained, why would she fake a pregnancy like that? It's not like we could just walk across the street and ask her. And between us, me and my girl were still in 2 separate perspectives about the whole thing. Then, besides all that, we'd have our answers in a matter of months, maybe weeks, because she looked ready to pop at any moment. We don't forget about the whole thing, and saying hey to them was definitely a little more awkward, but we were mostly occupied with settling into our new place, so the whole fake pregnancy thing was sort of drifting into the back of our minds. I mean, my girlfriend's mom might just be wrong. It would be slightly out of character for her, but it wasn't out of the question. It was kind of an insane thing to say. And then one day, we realized that we hadn't seen our neighbors for quite a while. We figured that if she really was pregnant, that we'd see all kinds of activity around the house at the time of the birth. But not only was there none of that whatsoever, but it was like the pregnant couple just sort of disappeared. This is what first clued us into the fact that something might be wrong and that my girlfriend's mom was actually right about such a wild accusation. We didn't hear anything about it though, not from our neighbors, and not on the news either. And then eventually, me and my girlfriend decided to stay in Texas, and we moved to Austin and later got married. And then, in September of last year, my wife sends me a link to a news website, along with about 6 super shocked face emojis and the words, "Look at the picture." I opened up the link and was greeted by the headline, "Texas woman allegedly stabbed mom-to-be 100 times, then tried to steal baby from womb." Then when I scrolled down, staring back at me is the mugshot of the heavily pregnant woman that we used to live across the street from. She was wearing that orange jumpsuit and looked like she'd been crying. And at first I thought she was the victim, but when the shoe finally dropped, I realized how the fake pregnancy had tied into what had happened. And let's just say that I know what it means to feel your blood actually run cold now. Last I heard, she's one of the only women on the Texas death row, and when you read through what she actually did, you realize that she legitimately deserves to be there. Our old neighbor had apparently faked the pregnancy to stop her boyfriend from leaving her, and then went about befriending an actual pregnant woman with the idea of stealing her baby. She got close to the murdered woman and her partner too. Like I hear that she actually went to the girl's wedding and all that stuff, and it was all just some long con job with murder being the final step of the plan. That's the part that really stuck with me. And I know that sounds dumb considering how horrific the crime itself was, but it's the slow burn aspect of it that really gives me the chills. Someone being that close to you, faking the whole thing, coming to your wedding and taking pictures and whatnot, and all the while, they're just waiting until the time is right to stab you to death, cut open your womb and steal your unborn child away. I, a 32-year-old female, used to have a job cleaning movie theaters in my early 20s. Because of how bad I needed the cash, I worked a string of crappy jobs around that time. But that one was the worst, and for a bunch of different reasons, too. Firstly, people who go to the movie theaters are just disgusting. Okay, maybe not all of y'all, and if you're one of the good ones, I thank you from the bottom of my boobs. But oh my god, it's like people were legitimately out there thinking, what is the single most disgusting thing that I can leave in this dark theater? And they went ahead and just did it. I found full diapers, needles, nail clippings, and then there's the time someone puked into an empty bag of chips and then somehow partially sealed the bag again, meaning one of my coworkers just grabbed it up off the floor and ended up with puke all over their shoes. There was like a ton of other stuff that we found that would end up with this post getting a not safe for work tag, so I'll just get into my next point and leave y'all in suspense. There's a bunch of other stuff that I hated about working that job, but without a doubt, the worst thing was the lack of security. The shift started at 2 a.m. Yeah, 2 in the morning. So there was that part that made me hate it. But getting to and from whatever theater we were cleaning with no means of transport aside from a bicycle put me in a very vulnerable position. That and the venues we cleaned didn't hire anyone but lazy, overweight, or meek-looking security guards to keep us safe. On a slow weekday night, I decided to go out and pick up the trash in the parking lot. This was maybe 4:30 to 5 in the morning, and the theater was also next to a super busy road, so people passing by could see into the well-lit but deserted parking lot clear as day. I had headphones in, along with the grabby stick thing to pick up gross stuff, when I suddenly get a call from my boss who was inside the building. I click the little button on my headphones wire to answer the call, only to hear my boss on the other end with a kind of concerned tone in her voice. She tells me again with this anxious tint to her voice that some truck just pulled into the parking lot opposite to where I was. She thought the guy was acting a bit suspicious, so I was to finish what I was doing immediately and come back inside. No sooner that she says that, but what I assumed was the same truck pulls right next to me and stops so quick that the tires actually screech. It all happened so fast that I just kind of panicked and froze up. But when the van's sliding door slid open, and I saw a guy with a shirt wrapped around his face leap out in my direction, I dropped everything and ran. There was only a few feet between me and the door, and I don't want to think about what would have happened if it had been any further away. Every single step that I took felt like it'd be my last before this shirt-faced guy took my legs out from under me, and when I got to the door, grabbed the little shutter bar and turned to slam it closed, he was right there in front of me. He couldn't have been any more than a second or two from getting a good firm grip of the door frame, and as it stood, he did manage to get his fingers on it, but it just so happened to be right as I slammed the door shut. The howl that he let out was satisfying on a primal level that I can barely put into words. Hurting a person that was trying to hurt me, it felt like the kind of instant karma that only comes around once in a lifetime. But as much as it felt great, we still weren't clear from danger, and later on, when the adrenaline high wore off, I was a complete nervous wreck. The cops were called, I gave a statement, and at the end of my shift, everyone took cabs home instead of walking or biking or taking early morning buses. It was like we all know that it could have been any one of us out there. Maybe if it had been someone a little slower than me, things would have been a lot different towards the end of that shift. And I think because of that, it made all my coworkers all the more empathetic, and although I didn't stay in that job for much longer after that, I still have a hell of a lot of affection for all the girls that I used to clean those theaters with. Maybe I'd have stayed a little longer if the theaters that we hopped between decided to beef up their nighttime security a little, but I think the most that we were ever promised was one extra overnight security guard, and the placement of a few security cameras. That wasn't good enough for me, though, and as I mentioned, I ended up quitting a few weeks after this incident. I felt very guilty for a while, though, because I was young and free enough to be able to quit if I wanted to, but most of my coworkers were not in that same position. They needed the money too bad to just up and leave a secure job like that, meaning they had no choice but to put themselves at risk, night after night, to take care of their families. And for that, as well as how well they took care of me following the most frightening incident of my whole life, I'll never, ever forget them. I used to play a lot of Call of Duty. I mean, I love the franchise, and I still do, but it was also like the only game my group of friends all played aside from playing FIFA or something. So if we wanted to all play something together, we played Call of Duty. We were all really into Modern Warfare 2, so as you can imagine, we were all very excited for the release of Modern Warfare 3. All of my chums at football were getting it, as we're all old mates from school, and I remember early November of 2011 being nothing but hype. The game dropped, it was awesome, and I think we all spent the next 3 days playing here and there before the weekend hit, by which point, nothing was stopping us from binging Team Deathmatch. That Friday night, I played from the moment I got home from work to about 1 o'clock in the morning, jumping in between parties as various groups came and went. Then, at about 1-ish, I'm still trying to work my way up to a nuke when, in the middle of a match, I hear this, "Our UAV is online," and then, "Help me," in quick succession. But the "help me" part didn't seem like it was coming from the game at all. I remember grabbing my TV remote and hitting the mute button and then just sitting there in the dark and quiet of my flat's living room, feeling more and more anxious with each passing second. I didn't know if I was imagining things or if it had come from the game chat or something. But when half a minute or so went by and I didn't hear the voice again, I just went back to playing Call of Duty and assumed it was nothing. But then no more than a few minutes go by when I hear the same weak "help me." And that time, I was 100% sure that it wasn't coming from the game. Now, just to clarify, I was talking with my friends via headphones, but all the game noises are coming out of the TV, and that's why I could even hear the voice in the first place and why it was so confusing at first. Now, anyway, I whip my headphones off, mute the TV, and walk over to my flat's living room window to look outside. I can't see anything, and a good couple of seconds pass without any more noise, but I'm seriously on edge by that point because I can't see who's saying "help me," but I know for a fact that I heard it without a shadow of a doubt. I'm not saying that I thought it was some ghost or anything, but because I can't see them, how long is it before someone walks into view with their head just hanging off or something? But then, I hear it a third time, slightly different though and clear as crystal. The voice sounded weak and desperate and so sad, and I could clearly hear someone just below my window say, "Can you please help me?" And just so you can understand what I'm talking about, you have to understand the layout of where I lived at the time. I lived on the first floor, so although I had a pretty good view of the pathway and the street outside, I couldn't see what was directly below me, and that's where the voice was coming from. But the thing is, if there was someone standing below the window that I looked out of, I could usually see their head and their shoulders at least, like it wasn't a complete blind spot like that. So the fact that I couldn't see anything at all, that's what had me so freaked out to the point that I thought something paranormal might actually be occurring. And the fourth time I heard it, I swear I felt my soul leave my body with fear. It was so creepy. But once I got over myself and got it into my head that it wasn't a ghost, I realized someone needed help, and they needed it fast. So long story short, I run outside, and I see this poor little old lady lying on the paving slabs under my window with a big bloody crack in her head. It's quite a sad story in the end. She had dementia and had gotten lost a few hours before, and then after wandering into our backyard, she apparently fell and became delirious with pain. We called the police, and thank God she was taken to the hospital, confused but unharmed. I'm glad to have helped her that day. It felt nice to think that I've actually helped rescue her. But still, for a few minutes there, I honestly was properly touching cloth. I've just recently discovered this subreddit, and I have a story to share that has really traumatized me for quite a while now, and I feel that this is a good place to share it. And it will be my first big Reddit post. A lot, if not all of the posts that I've read here are American and Canadian, so for context, it's important that I start that I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do have the odd missing person case or scary case, but it's otherwise safe here and not much happens. I mean that in a way that as a 19-year-old girl, I feel comfortable to walk the streets at night or go on hikes alone because it is pretty safe and everyone looks out for one another, generally speaking. Now, this happened in the summer of 2019. I will link a location so you can better understand and hopefully some photos if I can find them online. My boyfriend and I were headed out on a picnic date to a spot that we had visited before plenty of times. It's at the end of a very long, windy rural farm road off of the state highway, so you drive for like 15 to 20 minutes from the main road down a long farm stretch, and at the end is a large cul-de-sac and a surrounding massive farm. The owners of the farm have left the land kind of open to the public as a reserve because there are native trees and other things, and because about a 15-minute walk from the cul-de-sac and car park, there is a small waterfall that you can swim in. The track is really popular as it's one of the closest swimming spots to the nearest city, Hamilton, and it's really scenic. You cross footbridges, you pass by creek beds, and all that good stuff. The farmers still go through every now and then and do their own farm work, and there are fenced-off areas that the public can't enter as they still actively work the land. This particular day, my boyfriend and I were super happy because it was empty in the parking lot, and it was a super hot summer day, so that was really rare. The farmer was crossing the cows through the gate on a quad as we arrived, and he smiled and waved at us. He's an older man, and we had spoke before as we were regular visitors. So we set off towards the waterfall. We crossed one footbridge and passed through a big paddock of cows. The track is quite narrow and the creek is right off the edges, so you have to be careful. We saw the waterfall, decided against swimming as we had no towels, and headed back towards the car park. Now, on our way back, we decided to go down a little bit of a steep gravel off-ramp on the track that led to a more private tree-covered area right by the creek. And here's where it starts. We were kissing and whatnot. I was lying on my tummy reading a book, and my boyfriend was sitting up playing on his phone, and he was rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We were there for about 10 minutes before I turned and glanced up the gravel path, and way up even further on a hill through one of the farmer's gates, I see a man on a quad bike who I didn't recognize as one of the farmers, as there was only an old couple who worked the land. He was just sitting there, staring at my boyfriend and I don't even want to think about how long he had been there before we noticed. I told my boyfriend, and as soon as the guy saw that we were both looking at him, he opened the gate and started heading down. Now, both of us immediately got up to leave as we did not want to have a conversation with the farmer about us getting freaky on his land, which is what we both assumed would happen, but it was so much worse. The guy came down the gravel track and ran his quad right through the creek. He left it there running in the water and got off. He seemed to be talking to himself, saying things along the lines of, "Oh, I've messed up my quad. Oh, I've destroyed the engine," over and over before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave at this point, and he starts to head towards us. He didn't even make small talk, which was really strange because he just went straight into saying, "Have you guys seen any fish? I'm looking for some fish to kill." My boyfriend tells the guy that there's no fish in the creek as it's freshwater and he's probably best off to catch some eel, and this sends him into a fit, and he starts saying, "I don't want an eel. I want to kill some fish." I had made it a point to not look the guy in the eyes as I didn't want to draw the conversation towards myself because I was already extremely freaked out, and I didn't want him to notice that. My boyfriend is much more of the calm and strong one when it comes to stuff like this. But for a second, I did look at the guy and thought that he looked like his face was slightly deformed, possible Bell's palsy, as I worked in aged care and I've seen it a bit and it looks similar. I bent down to tie my shoe up, and when I was standing back up, that's when I saw a pistol on this man's waist. Listen to me close now. This is my first and last time in my entire life I have ever seen a real-life gun. It's incredibly hard to get a firearm in New Zealand, especially after the regulations following the shooting in Christchurch. And not only that, he had one pistol on his belt and was waving another one about in his hand while he was talking to my boyfriend about wanting to kill some fish. He was aiming it down the creek every now and again, and then swinging it around on his finger. My boyfriend gave me the stern look, and stern is the best word for it because the look spoke a million things to me in the moment, and he nodded his head towards the gravel hill leading back to the track. I grabbed the 2 bags that we had, fake-checked my phone, and told the man that our family were waiting for us back at the car park. He completely ignored what I had said and instead responded, "That's a cool hat you got on." Or something about my hat that was completely irrelevant, so I just dismissed it myself and said goodbye and made my way to the hill. In my mind, I did not want to look back and see my boyfriend being shot and then a gun at my head. I knew that our best bet was me getting up this hill on that narrow path that he couldn't ride his quad down and just sprinting to the farmhouses. As I'm walking up the hill, this guy says to my boyfriend, "That's a really pretty girl you got there." It was like all the intentions of his I didn't want to believe were confirmed, and I felt like I would die. My boyfriend, though, said a quick thank you, "We'll be off now," and headed up the hill with me. The guy kept talking on like the conversation hadn't even ended as we headed away, and he stood there, gun in hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were around the corner, we sprinted all the way back to the car park where, we hadn't noticed before, there were over 10 empty gun shells. Bullet shells? I'm not sure. I don't even know, but empty, used bullets. We had run into 2 girls in bikinis just arriving at the spot as we did and informed them about everything. They got in their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to ask if he knew the guy, as we had never seen him on the land before, but they weren't home. As for the gun, it's still so freaky to me that I had never seen one before. But these pistols look quite old and rusty, and when we discussed the incident on the way home, my boyfriend suggested that they were probably handed down to him from someone else. This incident has stuck with me for the past few years, and my boyfriend and I have not been able to return to that spot, which sucks because that's where we had our first date, and it was a really sentimental place for us. I had to drive past the road leading to the truck for like a year as I commuted between towns, and it always made me feel sick. I could have lost my life or my partner that day, or so much worse, and I'm always extremely grateful that my boyfriend is the man that he is and was able to steer this crazy guy away from us for us to leave and to communicate to me through movement to tell me what to do in my freaked out state. He told me after that he was ready to die if he had to because knowing the guy had been watching us beforehand and complimented me in a way that he did, it was clear that he could have had some very scary intentions. First, I know better than to meet people in their homes, so yes, this was stupid of me. I acknowledge that I acted in an unsafe way for my own well-being. I had posted this somewhere else, but it got removed, but let me get to the story. I met B on a dating app. He's been awkward to talk to, but we have stuck to texting, so I thought maybe it was just nerves and the form of communication. We have similar interests, so I kept the conversation going. He messaged me the other day asking if I wanted to come watch the new season of The Witcher. I hesitated and asked if he was inviting me to his place, and he said yes. He also quickly added that his female roommate was home, or else he would not have asked. I decided to go. Stupid, I know. I entered the apartment, and he's the only person there. I sat down on the other side of the room from him, and he got up and came to sit beside me. He turned on the show, and the next thing I know, he has his pants down, and he's asking me to sit on his lap. I'm not on birth control, as I just got divorced and I'm currently waiting for a doctor's appointment, and he was aware of that as we have discussed kids and pregnancy abilities because I have teens and he has no kids and wants one. So not only did this guy think that I was just going to get intimate with him first meetup, he was cool if we got pregnant apparently. I stood up and just went to leave, and he says something like, "Wait." I looked back, and he actually asked me if maybe I would just use my hand. I was just so shocked that I left and told him good luck. This happened back in early 2015. I was then a 19-year-old guy living in a rather bad area of Portland, Oregon. Even though there was occasionally some belligerent homeless people and drug addicts, violent muggings very rare, and most of the city felt very safe even at night. One of my best friends turned 21 and we decided to go bar hopping and then go clubbing. I was in a group of about a dozen other people, and 3 of which were my roommates. Unfortunately for me, I was the only one in my group who was either under the legal age of drinking or did not have a fake ID card. This meant that I was unable to enter the bar. However, to my luck, there was a nice Mediterranean restaurant across the street from the bar which I ended up going to. I stayed there for more than an hour and then I was ready to leave. I've done that walk many times, even at night, so I was never scared. Until this night, of course. And from my apartment, my roommates took an Uber to the bar. This meant that I would have to walk back since I didn't have an Uber and my phone battery was running low. The distance back to my apartment was about 3 miles. The time was already close to midnight and I would be reaching my apartment at around 1 a.m. I decided to walk the distance anyway since I haven't been at the gym and thought that this would be a good exercise for the day. I began my walk and passed by lots of drunks. Even though some of the drunks would shout things at me, I never felt unsafe or threatened by them, so I was okay. However, the last mile to my apartment was through a darkly lit park that can be scary at night, not because of any crime, but because there is only one street light in that stretch of road. I reached this somewhat creepy area at around 12:30. As I descend down the dark and narrow street, I notice a black Chevy Silverado speed past me and slowed down once he passes me. The truck almost comes to a stop but then decides to drive ahead. I begin to shrug it off at first. However, this is where things really start to get creepy. After I walk nearly a quarter mile forwards, the Chevy Silverado comes down the opposite direction and does the same thing. When the truck slows down and almost comes to a halt, I begin to panic but not openly show it. I pretend to ignore the vehicle, but my instincts tell me something is not right. The truck then starts to proceed, but this time, I can't keep calm. I was not in the middle of a dark and isolated park with no streetlights, and there's likely not to be a single person in sight. After I walk about 500 more feet, I begin to look in horror as the same pickup truck comes flying towards me and puts a sudden brake about 100 feet behind me. One man, at around twice my age and bald, opens the passenger door and comes out of his truck carrying what looked like a hockey club. I look behind and lock eye contact with him. He gives me the most haunting and sinister look I've ever seen from a real person. He begins to yell, screaming for me to get out of his sight or he'll mess me up. And then he says something I don't quite recognize. Now, I'm of Indian origin and I have darker skin, but I'm pretty sure what he said was a racial slur directed towards Muslims. As I was planning my escape, I remember how there was a wooded area between the park and my apartment. Where I was can cut across the park and go through some woods. Then right across the woods was my apartment. This was smart because I was taking that shortcut during the day and the truck will not be able to cut through the woods. Just as I ran towards those woods, I heard another yelling in the distance, saying, "F off," and I heard this from another large guy walking in the opposite direction of the sidewalk I was on. I then see another large man walking his German Shepherd towards me. After that, the truck driver then started running at us with his hockey club, and I just booked it. I dart towards the woods. Fortunately, the truck driver decides not to chase us and gets back in his truck. I reach my apartment 5 minutes later. At the parking lot of the apartment, I happened to see the guy walking his dog. He looked like a roughed-up bodybuilder type, so I was also a little afraid of him too. However, we had a pleasant conversation. I begin to head up to my apartment and look at my apartment window, and to my disgust and horror, I see that black Chevy Silverado drive by my apartment and then leave. My friends came home close to 3 in the morning, and just after I went to bed that night. Thankfully, I never saw that creep again, and I moved out of that apartment a few months later. After this incident, I avoid walking alone in dark spots and isolated areas at night. It's just not worth it. The events here took place when I was an 11-year-old girl on vacation with my family. My mother, younger brother, and I went down to Port Elizabeth to visit family. Being the only kids present meant that we were more excited to play in the ocean than spend time indoors. My mom picked a sunny day, we packed our boogie boards, and we headed to the nearest beach with my grandma tagging along. My brother and I ran towards a set of stairs leading down to the beach. I stopped. There were eyes on me. I just sensed it. Growing up in South Africa, you were taught to be vigilant. Notice your surroundings. Notice people especially. I looked around the crowd trying to pinpoint what was setting my radar off, and then I found it. 2 men about 20 meters in front of me, about late 20s to early 30s. They were frozen in place, staring at me with big, toothy smiles on their face. I returned a smile and a nod, acknowledging their presence but also making them aware that I saw them. Be friendly, not naive. Be polite. Don't trust. Observing them, I felt unsettled. The crowd was moving around them. They didn't speak to one another, and they only seemed to move as I glanced away. I was alarmed, but only made a mental note to keep an eye on them, continued down the stairs, and jumped into the soft sand. My brother and I waited for the adults to pick a spot to set up before we took off swimming. Some time went by. I saw the same men from earlier wade into the water quite some distance from us and felt a bit silly for still worrying about them. But I just couldn't shake that uneasiness. I got out and took a rest by my mom. I didn't see the men anywhere, but the feeling of having eyes on me stayed. I chalked it up to paranoia and went back to the water after a few minutes. My brother had gotten out of the water and started digging his magnificent sand pit, so I decided to use him as a landmark to determine my position in the water while riding the waves out. I did this a few times. Suddenly, goosebumps shot up my back. I looked around, and the same men were just a few meters away from me, waving and beckoning me towards them. I was having fun until then and hadn't noticed them approaching. Adrenaline set in as I saw them smiling once more, and their eyes seemed blank, insincere, and out of place with those huge grins. I nervously grinned back and just shook my head at their invitation to come closer. I'm sure the fear was well written all over my face, though. And as if to confirm my fears of their intentions, they started towards me. I knew I wouldn't be strong enough in the water to fight or run or swim, and nobody was close enough to hear me call out. As I was panicking, the water suddenly pulled me deeper into the sea, and a huge wave was coming. I placed my boogie board in position and started paddling. I was now further into the ocean than the creeps. The wave hit when they were about a meter away, and it took me right past them. I felt relief for a split second, but then I felt a hand grabbing and yanking my ankle hard. My heart caught in my throat. I kicked out of instinct. Fortunately, being sunscreen doused, I was slippery and managed to get free instantly. The wave carried me all the way to the beach. I was coughing with a mouth full of seawater, but scampered to my feet and ran to fetch my brother. I told him I'd race him back to Mom, and he was delighted for the challenge. I glanced back from where the sea had just ejected me. The creeps were still standing where they were, still smiling, and still beckoning me towards them. I stayed at my mom's side until we finally packed up to head home. As we walked to our car, I looked over my shoulder, and there they were. 2 grown men, just staring and waving at a child that they had tried to grab like nothing was weird. And then they just turned around and disappeared into the crowd. So someone was following me home yesterday, and now I don't want to leave the house. I'm a 15-year-old female, and I was walking home from the store yesterday, and I saw a black box car drive past me extremely slow, and the man in the car was clearly watching me. And when he fully passed me, I saw him watching me in his rearview mirror. I thought it was weird, and slowed down my pace so that I could tell if he was waiting for me or just a slow driver. He was still driving extremely slow, but moved a little when he saw 2 guys riding past on bikes. He then moved to the edge of the short street that we were on and waited there. I was still towards the beginning of the street, so I acted like I forgot something, and I turned around to get out of his sight. I waited and kind of peeked out to see if he had left, and when I saw that he was gone, I continued walking. I didn't think it would happen, but I made a mental note that if I saw the car behind me, it meant that he circled back around. After I continued walking, I made 3 turns and was 3 turns away from my house. When I was walking up a little hill and almost at the 4th turn, I looked back and saw that the man at the corner that I had just turned from, letting me know that he'd circle back around to find me. He sat there watching me continue walking until I got up the little hill and turned the corner. Then, as I had just barely made the last turn and was close to my house, I saw the man's car just turn the corner up the street, straight across from the way I was walking, waiting there. I pulled out my phone to call my mom and walked the other way, and he left soon after I pulled out my phone. My mom came out and walked with me back to the house, and I didn't see the car for the rest of the day. But I kept thinking, he knows what neighborhood I stay in. What if he comes back? What if the next time he comes back, I'm out by myself again? What if no one's home to call? What if he sees me leaving and comes back when I'm the only one home? I'm so scared that he's going to come back that I don't want to go outside. I don't want to show him where I live, especially because I'm home alone very often. I have summer school and I have to go, but I don't want to leave the house in fear that he might be waiting for me. And I'm constantly looking out the windows to see if I can spot him, especially since if he was at the store that I was at, he definitely stays somewhere near that neighborhood. In 2017, I had heard news of people dressing up as clowns and running around with knives at night. I typically brush those types of things off because I got my own problems. I, at the time, was a 20-year-old female and was often up at all hours of the night dealing with my screaming newborn. It was January or February, so we still had some snow and I wasn't able to get out of the house often. Taking out the trash, which was located right out the back door, was usually the most I got of fresh air. One morning I took out the trash and happened to glance over to the right and noticed footprints directly under the window to my baby's room. I walked over to inspect, and not only were there footprints, but there was also hand indentations on the window screen. Weird, but baby slept in my room, so not very concerned at the moment, but the boyfriend was losing his marbles. Now fast forward a couple of days and I was up at around 3 a.m. and heard not exactly what I would call screaming, but more of a screeching howl. We have lots of stray cats, so I kind of thought that that's what it was and ignored it. Once the sun was up, I looked out the window and noticed a few sets of footprints that really didn't make sense because it kind of looked like someone had just been passing between the houses. But again, I blow it off because we had a drug house across the street, and we've had people cross through our yard before to get to that house. Maybe 4 nights later at 3 a.m., I'm breastfeeding and hearing a dragging noise against the house, and from where I was sitting on my couch, I could see the back door. The back door has a window with blinds on it and doesn't seal well due to wood rot on the frame. I pause the TV and listen just to hear it again, now directly at the back door. Looking over, I can clearly see a looming figure just standing in the window, holding one of those big kitchen knives, and granted the blinds were shut, so I'm seeing the creepy shadow version of this. He runs the knife across the window panes before softly knocking. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my newborn latched on because my phone is in the bedroom and something in me doesn't want whoever this is out of my vision. So I stand up and readjust because I really didn't want a screaming baby right then, and walked into my kitchen and flick on the light and then said, just loud enough for him to hear me, "Hey man, I already called the police and I'm sure you don't want to deal with them, so why don't you just go home?" I don't know why I talked to him so calm and normal, like I don't think he was expecting anyone to say anything because he froze that moment I began talking. He talked it over with himself for a minute and just darted down toward the alleyway. Never had anything like that happen again, but the boyfriend was incredibly mad that I didn't wake him up to handle the situation or at least actually call the police. Not sure if this counts as a creepy encounter, but I sure was creeped out once my sleep-deprived self realized what had just happened. This is going to be a pretty tame story compared to a lot of the great ones I've read here, but since it happened to me, I think it's pretty spooky. I'm writing this only a few hours after everything had happened, now that I've calmed down and the sun is coming up and I feel somewhat safer. Last night I was lying in bed reading a little before I went to sleep. I think it's important to clarify that I live on the outskirts of my town. Still in town, but definitely on the edge, off the highway that leads out of town and into about a 15-mile long stretch of lots of country. Woods, fields, a few residences, but mostly open highway. So other than the other tenants in my actual apartment building, it's normally very quiet in my area. My building is a square with 4 apartments, and for each of us, our door simply faces out into the open. There's no lobby or foyer or anything. My door in particular looks out into a large field that goes up a hill. I don't remember the exact time, but sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., someone randomly started banging on my door, which freaks me out at the best of times in broad daylight, but especially in the middle of the night. I nervously went to ask who it was, and this guy with a deep voice claimed that he was a police officer and that I needed to let him in. That's what he said. I needed to let him in, not that I needed to open the door. Luckily, I watch and listen to a lot of true crime stuff, so I got pretty suspicious really quick. I just got near instant alarm bells because he couldn't tell me why I needed to let him in, what I supposedly did, and he never asked me what my name was. He also didn't really sound like a cop, if you know what I mean. Obviously, I was feeling creeped out, so I called 911 to confirm that there was actually an officer at my address, and they said there wasn't. At this point, I'm freaking out, and I kind of call out through the door that I'm on the phone with the police, and the guy just kind of bangs on my door one more time, and then stops making noise, I presume because he ran off at this point. They dispatched 2 cars to my apartment, and the officer took a good look around. Unfortunately, the guy was long gone by the time they got there, and I never saw him, so I don't have a description of him or anything. But the cops said two things to make me feel better. One, they post more patrols in my area over the Halloween weekend, and two, it was most likely a Halloween prank because the bar down the street from my apartment had had a party and it had just closed not too long before. Always trust your instincts. And remember that if you have any doubts about someone claiming to be a police officer, call 911 and confirm that they are who they say they are. Dispatch and the officers who came tonight told me that you will not get in trouble for making sure the person talking to you is actually an officer. This also applies to situations where it's nighttime and dark, so you can't really see for sure if it's a real cop car behind you or not. If you see flashing lights behind you on a back road or a dark area at night, put on your hazard lights and call 911 first to make sure that it's actually a police car. You won't get in trouble, and it's better safe than sorry. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you get a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. As well as that, this story needs some background to make sense. I currently live in a town in the UK that could be considered safe, but it has its fair share of dangerous people lurking around. I previously worked at a gas station where I've had numerous encounters with people trying to shoplift, many of them carrying knives and such. I hope this gives you a brief idea of what my neighborhood is like. Now that that's been said, this story happened only a few days ago. My cat had been missing for a few weeks, which wasn't normal for him, so I was evidently quite worried. I had been keeping my window open every night in case he came into our garden and started meowing like he usually does when he wants to come back into the house. I had spent the past few nights going out and looking for him, but finding and hearing nothing. This night was like any other. I was spending the night playing games and listening closely for anything coming from my window. At around 3 a.m. in the morning, I thought that I had heard something, so I bolted downstairs because I believed that what I was hearing was my cat. I thought of taking my dog with me in case I needed protection, but I realized that that would be a terrible idea since the cat is scared of the dog. So if the cat really was out there, he would just run away the second he saw the dog. I go outside with a flashlight in hand and started to hear weird noises. I couldn't put my finger on the noises at first, but when I listened closer, I realized that they were the sounds of scuffling around the back of the garden where we have a garage, a greenhouse, and a chicken coop. My first thought was there was some sort of animal trying to get at the chickens. This didn't worry me because we have a very aggressive rooster that can and will attack anyone that gets too close to the chickens. He has done so multiple times in the past. I started walking closer to the back of the garden, and the noises started to sound more human-like. It sounded like multiple people were running around. I was confused and stopped for a moment, standing there and listening. A gut feeling started brewing in my stomach, telling me to just go back inside, but I couldn't move. I didn't know if it was because of fear or me trying to come up with a reasonable explanation for the sounds. The more I listened, the more frequent the sounds got, as if something or someone was trying to lure me to them. I went back inside to grab the biggest knife I could and started scanning the garage with my dog, finding nothing. When I got back outside, I heard the chickens going crazy, which made me think that there was an animal attacking them. I walked to the chicken coop to check on them and make sure that they were okay, and they calmed down. As I exited the chicken coop, I soon realized that the sounds had all stopped. I stood still, searching for the sounds, trying to strain my ears. After what felt like hours standing there in the pitch dark with my flashlight, not daring to point it in the direction of where I heard the sounds previously, I snapped out of my daze and bolted back into the house. I made sure to lock the front door, and when I got to my room, I left my window open, and to my surprise, I heard whispering. Whispering coming from the garden, and then a sudden metallic bang. I thought I was imagining things, and this was all some sort of dream or hallucination. The next night, I went out again, calling my cat's name multiple times, but I got no response. And then I heard the snapping of branches coming from the direction where the greenhouse was located. I stood there, and I heard a person scraping or hitting something with a stick, followed by footsteps coming towards me. I hurried back into the house, and I heard my gate opening, so I locked the door just in case. Right after I closed the door, the handle slammed down, which scared the life out of me. I immediately thought that it was someone from my garden coming for me. I opened the door, ready to fight the person on the other side, and it turned out to be my sister coming back from walking the dog. I'd like to say thank you to her for scaring the soul out of me and putting me in full fight mode. She asked me why I was going around locking all the doors, and I explained to her everything that had happened over the past few nights, specifically what had happened the night before and that night. After I told her the story, she obviously didn't believe me and told me that it was all in my head. I told her that the sounds were there right now and asked her to come with me if she didn't believe me. We stood in the garden, listening, and on cue, the sound started back up again. My sister stopped dead in her tracks. I looked at her and said, "I told you so," but she shushed me. The sound of someone jogging or sprinting towards us came from the darkness. We both ran back into the house, and my sister reasonably demanded that we lock all the doors in the home. On the third night of looking for my cat, I was sitting in my room and decided not to go outside because of all that had previously happened. At 2 a.m., I decided to go outside and look for my cat once again. I put on my coat because that night I was determined to finally find my cat and put this all behind me, not caring how long it would take. I stood there in the open pitch black outside again, calling my cat's name, but I didn't get a response. I went to the front of the garden with my flashlight, looking and calling for him as well. After not getting any response, I sat myself down on the front steps of my house, flashing my light and still calling for my cat. An hour went by, and I got thoroughly bored just sitting there doing nothing. I started walking around the garden again, headed towards the greenhouse. I stopped myself, remembering what had happened the previous night. Thinking about it, I went and got the dog, both for protection and because, as stated before, the dog would bark if the cat was there. This would tell me if the cat was there or not. I know, genius thinking on my part. And the dog and I went towards the greenhouse area knowing that either my cat was there or there was some random person. I let the dog go and she did nothing. No barking, just silence. This gave me a feeling of relief that allowed me to walk after her, still scanning the area. And then I saw it. The discovery that chilled me to my bones. Someone had sunk a stick into the ground through a plastic bag. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why did a stick in the ground scare you? The reason being that it was sunk so deep into the ground, not even I, being pretty fit, could take it out of the ground. Someone had stabbed that stick into the ground with a scary amount of force. Making the situation worse, there was a pumpkin sitting right next to the stick knife, as I called it. But here's the thing. We don't grow pumpkins. We never have. But there it was, a pumpkin, sitting in our garden. It clicked in my head that there had either been one person or multiple people in the garden that night. The sounds that my sister and I had heard were people sharpening the sticks and messing about with them. They had been making noises around the property to lure someone out to investigate and do God knows what to them. In that moment, I was thankful to have had the common sense to run away when I did, because thinking about what these people could have done to me in the dark gives me chills, even as I write this. After this revelation, I checked behind the trees and such, making sure no one was there. Content with not finding anyone and making a note to myself to come back in the morning to get a clearer picture, I returned to my steps. I sat there, waiting for around an hour longer. Starting to get tired, bored, and hungry, I went back into the house. The acceptance of my cat being dead lurked into the back of my mind while I continued to mess about on my PC with my window open. And then, once again, I heard meowing. I rushed outside so quickly that I forgot to put on shoes, but I also had the presence of mind to grab a knife on my way out, deciding that if anyone was out there, I'd confront them on the spot. I reached my gate and saw my cat standing on the fence. I dropped my knife and my heart was filled with joy. I can't explain to you how happy I was to see him there. There had been no noises since that night, but I'm still wary when I go out at night. I thought about this experience and realized how lucky I was to not have gone.